Joseph from Melbourne, Australia. Last week, Bret Hart was in Australia for StarCast, hosted by Oceania Pro Wrestling. He also did a self-promoted Q&A with PCW. I went to both shows, and the cost of going to both shows was more affordable than the cheapest ticket to the Undertaker One Dead Man show. Bret told some great stories, many of which has been told before, such as how he almost became Cowboy Bret Hart, Bret and Owen not talking while they were rivals, and how he beat up Vince McMahon at Survivor Series, which he claims is the highlight of his career. One thing I did not know is that Bret does not think much of Gunther. He referred to him as, quote, that German idiot in WWE, and doesn't think he's safe. Well, he's from Austria, not Germany. I know he hates chops, and that's a big part of Gunther's matches, but I wouldn't think that it would be that big of a deal. Are you aware if Bret Hart has given any reason as to why he does not think much of Gunther? No, and that's very disappointing to hear. Now, he did make comments last year, I think it was, as it relates to the first Clash at the Castle, which was in 2022. Bret was there. He was in attendance for that show. And that was my match of the year in WWE, Sheamus and Gunther for the Intercontinental title. I just thought that was fantastic. Bret didn't feel the same way. And his issue really had to do with everybody on the roster these days slapping their leg. For Bret, that's a big no-no. He doesn't like chops either. But that really is what bothered him. And I dug up the quote. This is what Bret said. He was on a podcast, and he said, I went to a show not too long ago in Cardiff, a pay-per-view. It was embarrassing to sit in the front row and watch all the kids in the audience slap their leg as the wrestlers slap their leg in these kick spots where they pretend to kick each other with shin pads and slap sounds over and over. To realize that the crowd is in on it, the entire floor is clapping and slapping their leg. I'm going, we used to try to make it real. What happened? Everybody is in on it. It's a big, giant charade. And look, Bret is an old school guy. You know, he went through the dungeon. He's part of the Hart family, trained by Stu. And a lot of old school guys will feel the same way about modern day ways of pro wrestlers, incorporating spots like that into their matches. Then again, you look back during Bret's era, pretty much every era of wrestling. What about the stomps? That's one argument that I would counter with. Why is that not just as ridiculous? You don't think people don't pick up on the fact that when somebody throws a kick, that he stomps the mat with the other leg to make a sound? Bret did that. Owen did that. Davey Boy did that. Most wrestlers do that, if not every wrestler does that. How does he feel about that? Bret has very strong opinions on things like that. And Bret is one of the greatest of all time to ever do it. He's earned the right to feel that way. I agree in that there is a over-reliance on chops in wrestling. Now, it is a big part of Gunther's arsenal in his matches. The thing that separates him, though, from, let's say, an Eddie Kingston, for example, and I like Eddie. But, Eddie goes out there and he does these weak-ass looking chops when he does the like the shotgun chops and everything. And I know that was a thing in Japan as well. And he's a big Japanese wrestling guy, so he's emulating that, but it just looks ridiculous. And guys go overboard with it. And even I'm like, all right, enough already. I love Minoru Suzuki, but there are times where I'll watch him and he'll be in a chop battle with somebody and I'll be like, all right, can we move on, please? Can we move on to the next spot? They rely on it so much. Bret's not wrong in that way. The thing about Gunther that I think separates him from those people, yes, he does chop a lot, but he'll take that big hand and one chop is all that it takes. And the other guy sells it. The other guy's got to sell for it, but it's just this devastating move. It's not like a Ric Flair chop or an Eddie Kingston chop or a Suzuki chop or anyone else's. So it does make him different than everybody else in that way, just how devastating it comes off as. And obviously Gunther could do a lot more than just chop. I don't know if Bret has any specific ill feelings about him, or if it was just tied into the match that he had with Sheamus. I know they asked Gunther about it. He was on the bump, I think last year at some point. He obviously was bothered by Bret's comments. He didn't really have a ton of great things to say about it. I mean, he put him over, but he said that's where it ends. I don't have anything else nice to say about this man. And it's a shame. It's almost like I'm looking at this. It's like when your parents argue. It's like, stop arguing. You know, I like both of you. I don't want to see you argue. But again, Bret is an old school guy, and he's not wrong in a lot of the things that he says. And then there are other things where it's like, you know what? He does come across as someone who just can't accept the way that certain things change. Wrestling is not always going to be exactly the way it was 30 years ago. But I understand the mentality. It worked. It worked back then. It'll work today. And it breaks his heart that wrestling, the curtain has been pulled back so much. Again, I get it. He's not wrong. You know, I mean, social media and everything, kayfabe has been virtually destroyed. Tony Khan is out there in his neck brace trying to keep it alive, but kayfabe has been destroyed. It is something that I miss as a fan. When I used to be able to suspend my disbelief a little bit more, now WWE will put out a documentary. It wasn't even just a YouTube thing. They aired this on television. They showed Damian Priest in the gorilla position with his Money in the Bank briefcase waiting, and the other members of the Judgment Day are crowding around. It's like an actor is about to go out and act out his spot. Instead of it coming off as more of a spontaneous thing, he's waiting. He's waiting there to get, okay, now go. And he goes through the curtain. I'm like, why are they showing this on TV? Even I will take a step back sometimes and say, okay, you know what? I wish they didn't air that. I wish they didn't say that. I find myself doing the same thing, but I also accept reality. The curtain has been pulled back. The genie is out of the bottle. You can't put it back in. You adapt, you evolve. Time goes on, things change. It's the way it is. Some things are better than they used to be. Some things are worse. And Bret is entitled to have that opinion. But I also think Gunther is fantastic. And in their prime, a Bret Hart, like early to mid 90s Bret Hart against modern day Gunther, take my fucking money.